the territory, so we can really appreciate how the anatomy map that we learn in more classical anatomy makes sense of the moving territory of the living being. So whether you're a movement teacher or a manual therapist, this is just juice, and we're working with little bits of the body each time. So this time we're doing the lumbosacral throne.
We are, and I'll go ahead and share the screen just now. We're working with the muscle premium. Wow, there's the abdominal membrane, anterior view. So this, basically we're going to go from the outside in, and we're going to stick to the program, and we only have 8 minutes left. So it will be a whistle stop tour. We'll start peeling back the layers. So we've got external obliques, and during our virtual dissections on the Fridays, we'll follow much the same format according to aims and objectives. And our aim and objective for this session is to just get you familiar with our format. So if I go ahead and hide external oblique, what is revealed is some interesting layout. And what you might notice is that there are different sections that are very tidy, and they have lots of straight lines and end points. And Joe, do you have a word about what that might look like in an actual body?
Well, completely. That in most of these dissections, the fascia has been removed, the superficial fascia, some of the deep fascia, and it's all been tidied up to make it look really clean. And that really helps us to learn it. And that also helps us to acquire the Karen and I refer to them as the postcodes of the area, but it doesn't really tell you much about the accommodation of how we animate these myofascial continuities. But what this enables us to do together is feedback both the classical and the what we call contemporary anatomy, where we integrate this as a whole. And because Karen is so skilled with using this program, because we actually secretly do spend an awful lot of time nerding out together, don't tell anybody, we have a lot to say. And look how brilliant that is. The cavity inside, it doesn't look anything like that. It's not disconnected from the viscera that's in there, and we'll go into a bit more detail, but we start getting a feel for the pelvic floor and a feel for the throne. And I think in practical terms, Karen, this is a really important one, because we're sitting down so much more. So it contributes to understanding sitting and things that we would do in movement in a yoga class or a Pilates class or any sort of movement, how we animate the pelvis. And here's a gorgeous view of it with none of the wrapping, as it were, and none of the viscera. But go on, you speak about it, because it's showing, it's amazing.
Well, we can peel off the layers, but really, as we get to understand and appreciate in anatomy, that it's all layers. You don't just peel back layers to reveal the actual anatomy, like you open the bonnet of a car and then you get to the nuts and bolts. It's not really like that. So everything is completely continuous inside. And when you open up the membranes of the anterior, the cavity, the ventral cavity, we start to get to see the inside as absolutely continuous. But what's great about this program is that it does tidy things up so that you do get the delineations that make it clear to kind of get your bearings. So that's our main focus, is to get everyone comfortable, because anatomy can be, let's be honest, pretty intimidating and very nerdy, because you're working in at least 2 or 3 different languages when you're studying anatomy deeply. You've got Latin, of course, the English, some Greek quite often. And if you're a yoga practitioner, quite often there's some Sanskrit thrown into the mix as well. So that not only is the language really complicated, but the interconnectedness of everything, it can also be quite intimidating. So we really want people to come to this, not feel intimidated, feel inspired, and go away feeling more confident and more empowered. So to that end, we'll focus on building our landmarks to make things simple. So many of you will know this, and if there's a way for you to comment in the chat box about this image, if you know what that is, I'll just hide the screen that tells you what it is. So we get a lot of questions about these muscles.
And psoas major and minor, and iliacus that's next to them. And one of the keystones is that when we look in classical anatomy, for example, you look up the psoas in Gray's Anatomy and you will get referred to the iliopsoas complex. And it's one of my pet peeves, but we'll talk about that in the class. Why is it a pet peeve, and why is the psoas so important in so many other ways? And I know lots of you have read Liz Koch's work, Stalking the Wild Psoas, and the whole notion of the neurology of the psoas and what it means. And we don't just list that in our programs. We describe, we explain, we make it human, essentially, don't we, Karen?
I like to think so.
Yeah.
And we have a laugh. Maybe you can spot the difference. Spot the difference. So if we give the viewer a inside view, so if we're looking down from above, we've got a superior view. And if I change the gender, the phenotype changes, not just with the organs, which aren't even visible in this model, but can you notice the phenotype, the presentation of the pelvis in the male, the angularity and the narrowness in the male? And then when we just flip that switch to the female, what happens with the breadth of the ilia, for obvious reasons. But something else we'd really like to focus on, Joe and I both being mothers ourselves, really interested in the pelvic cavity as a chamber of chambers. So inside we have this interconnected system of hollow organs and different organs in the pelvis of the male and the female, and they're anchored in differently. And that's one update to this version of Visible Body that's been great, is that there is more of the connective tissue, and you can start to see some of the players in our experience of having, in particular, a female body versus having a male body. So that phenomenology, like how does it feel? What is the actual experience, the lived experience of having a body? And we can maybe give some names for some of the common experiences that we share. So that's the difference. That's one great thing the software is now doing, is showing us some of that endopelvic fascia and the ligaments that connect the pelvic organs in place.
And what we hope is that some of these things that we're offering you give you context for anatomical content, and you can go and look that up and confirm what we cover and watch the recordings over and over again so that you become familiar with it. But what we also want to do is make sure that we provide context for what that means in terms of your practice, whatever your practice is. So one of the things that we talk about in yoga very often, you hear people say, let's stand with our feet hip width apart. And of course, that actually means something subtly quite different for a male to a female. We are different. We may all be equal, but that doesn't mean we're identical. And our what's the plural of pelvis? Pelvixes, pelvi, whatever, are different for a number of reasons, and we tend to hold ourselves differently as well. So I think we also, dare I say, interface with the self-sense, what the anatomy does. And this is so exciting because each one integrates with the next one, and we're actually doing one completely devoted to the female phenotype, quote unquote. And now you're playing with some of my favorite breathing bits, because of course the breath is not isolated to the rib basket or above the diaphragm. But we will get to all that, and we call it the throne because we need to be at home in it.
I think that is such a beautiful resting place for this live offering. This has been 10 minutes, and one of our sticking points is that we are setting our time limits and sticking to them. So bringing our discussion to rest in the throne, the Lumbosacral Throne. Don't miss it. It's going to be 60 minutes on Friday. The event link is in this post. And if you have any questions, please reach out to either Joe or myself. Joe is really approachable. Besides being a celebrity in the anatomy world and yoga world, she's a really nice person. So if you have any questions, either one of us, we will be glad to help you out.
Karen's actually nicer than me. She's really much nicer than me.
No way. We're both just like so keen and excited. We can't even believe we get to do this. Now I have to figure out how to turn it off.
Project.
I honestly don't know how to turn it off. It was all going so well.
Do you stop the recording at the bottom of the Zoom?
Well, I thought that I'm going to stop the